Good day. My name is Gordon O'Brien. I'm a scientist from the University of Mpumalanga in South Africa, and today I'm representing Hydrock and presenting a blended learning module, the first of 5 blended learning modules titled, it's an introductory module titled Environmental Flows for the Nile Basin. This blended learning module is produced as an outcome of the Nile Basin Initiative study titled Course Environmental Flow Assessments for Selected Sites in the Nile Basin. These blended learning modules have been presented in the context of the strategy for the management of environmental flows in the Nile Basin. The learning modules address principles of good environmental flows, aspects of environmental flow assessments, methods, transboundary management principles and practices, application of regional environmental flow assessments, and the implementation of the Nile eFlows framework and the management of environmental flows in the context of sustainable development goals. As I said that there are 5 modules. This is the first, an introductory module. The others include the Nile Basin eFlows framework and its application, environmental flow assessment methods, looking at advantages and disadvantages of different methods as well, examples of eFlow assessments in Africa, and there we're going to specifically look at PropFlow and its implementation in some case studies. Implementation of the Nile eFlows framework is what we'll end off with. To present the structure of each of these modules, what I've done is listed on the left here is to show you that there are the 5 modules. These are the 5 blended learning modules. Each of them have got this structure, these contents, an introduction, objectives of the modules, content of the modules, lessons, and then further reading recommendations. And this icon on the right here is going to be presented throughout the presentation just to make sure that you can see where we are in the context of the module. Okay, let's get started. So the Nile Basin Initiative recognizes that the sustainable management of the shared Nile Basin water resources requires the establishment of relevant transboundary policy instruments. This is within the context or within the Nile Basin's sustainability framework. These policy instruments need to conform to existing environmental and social policies. The sustainable use of these socio-ecologically important water resources of the basin required the coordinated management and management of environmental flows on meaningful spatial scales. In 2016, the NBI did not have general standards and norm for the establishment of environmental flows in the basin. The NBI initiated a process to develop a transboundary level guidance document for environmental flows. The objective of the guidance documents on environmental flows was to develop a structured and scientifically based Nile eFlows framework for establishing eFlow requirements and managing flows in the basin for transboundary water resource planning purposes. This resulted in the establishment of the Nile eFlows framework that was published in 2016. There are some important abbreviations used in the blended learning modules, and I'm going to go through them in this introductory module. In the rest of the modules, I will refer to this introductory module. I will explain some of these terms now so that if they do pop up during some of the other blended learning modules, you'll have an idea of what they are. First is basic human needs. That generally refers to the amount of water required to carry out individuals' daily lively activities using water for drinking, for bathing, etc., and cooking, for example. Bayesian networks is the modeling framework. It is a tool that is used to determine, to generate environmental flows. The Bayesian network program that we utilize in PropFlow, which is an environmental flow assessment, for example, is called Netica. The building block methodology is another holistic environmental flow assessment method. We will refer to that. Catchment management strategies are strategies generally established to manage water resources on large catchment scales. Conditional probability tables are part of the Bayesian network probability modeling approach of PropFlow. A decision support system is support tools that are established for different methods or tools, procedures that are incorporated in environmental flow assessments. The DRM is a desktop reserve assessment model, which is a hydrological environmental flow assessment method. DRIFT is the downstream response to imposed environmental flow transformation. It's the acronym for a tool another holistic environmental flow assessment method. EAC is East African Community. EIS refers to ecological importance and sensitivity, generally referring to the ecological importance of ecosystems based on its biodiversity or ecosystem processes, and the sensitivity refers to its vulnerability to changes. ELOA is an environmental assessment framework. It refers to ecological limits of hydrologic alteration. EMC, ecological management classes. We generally refer to the 6 ecological management classes, class A, B, C, D, E, and F, and they refer to A referring to a natural or pristine reference condition, and F refers to a critically modified unsustainable state. And on occasion we will unpack these different classes and refer to them during the blended learning modules. EFA is environmental flow assessment, which is when you undertake assessments to determine environmental flows. EFM is environmental flow methods. EFR, environmental flow requirements. Environmental flow requirements are often referred to or synonymous with environmental flows. And then eFlows is environmental flows. Environmental impact assessment is EIA. EWR also relates to environmental water requirements, which can be synonymous with environmental flow requirements or eFlows. FSR is the flow stress response method, which is an environmental flow assessment method, a habitat rating method. GIS is geographic information systems. HFSR, habitat flow stress response method, an environmental flow assessment method. IFIM, in-stream flow incremental methodology, another environmental flow assessment method. IWRM refers to integrated water resource management. MAF is the mean annual flows. MAP, mean annual precipitation. NBI, Nile Basin Initiative. SAP is the Nile Basin Strategic Action Program. NBSF, Nile Basin Sustainability Framework. PHABSIM, that's how it's pronounced, PHABSIM, Physical Habitat Simulation Model, which is another environmental flow assessment method. PES is present ecological state, usually referred to as category A to F again. RRM is the relative risk model, which is part of the prob flow assessment method. RQOs is resource quality objectives, and that will be unpacked. It's the approach established in South Africa and widely utilized in Southern Africa, and also relates to the determination of targets within a sustainable development goal context. RR is risk regions, which is a part of the prob flow method. SPATSIM is SPATSIM, is the Spatial and Time Series Information Management Tool, which is a hydrological statistics and evaluation tool. SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. SUMHA is the Sustainable Management of Hydrological Alterations. It's another holistic environmental flow assessment framework. TPCs are thresholds of potential concern. Okay, moving on to the introduction or the objectives for this module. The objective of this module is to introduce the suite of blended learning modules developed as a part of the course Environmental Flow Assessment for selected sites in the Nile Basin. This in the context of the environmental flow management in the Nile Basin, and it's applicable to other parts of Africa as well. If we just look at the content of the module, we're going to talk about introductions to environmental flow management in Africa. We're going to look at introductions to environmental flow management in the Nile Basin. We're going to then focus on introduction to other environmental flow modules, and that is where we're specifically going to unpack the rest of the modules, and that includes aspects of the framework and its application, assessment methods, prob flow, implementation of the environmental flow assessment framework, which incorporates as well, the last point, the implementation of water resources management on different scales and sustainable development goals. Let's start with the introduction to environmental flow management in Africa. The traditional view of water resources in Africa if I can generalize, has been that water has been a resource that people have utilized. We do know our dependence on water resources, but it is just a resource that is available for us in the environment to utilize. We have this utilitarian view of we need to just utilize water resources. There has been a shift in our view of our relationship with water, that not only is it a resource that we utilize, but that we are a part of this dynamic process. We are a part of the system. And the only way that we can ensure that water resources are managed in a sustainable manner is if we consider ourselves to be a part of that system, and that what we do actually affects the availability and the quality or the condition of those resources and the ability of that ecosystem which we are a part of to provide that resource that we depend on. So no longer are we just the benefactors of this resource that is separate from us, but we are a part of that resource, and the well-being of the livelihoods of those vulnerable African communities is intrinsically linked with that larger ecosystem. There is more reading available, and I've made some links available as we'll move along. So if you would like to get more information, you can click on that access. That's where some of these principles come from. Let's look at the definition of environmental flows. So what is it? Environmental flows describes the quantity, timing, and quality of freshwater flows and levels in the context of lake ecosystems or wetland ecosystems that is necessary or required to sustain ecosystems. In turn, they which support human cultures, economies, livelihoods, and their well-being. The Brisbane Declaration of Environmental Flows in 2018 identified aquatic ecosystems to include rivers, streams, springs, floodplains, and other wetland and lake ecosystems, coastal water bodies, including lagoons and estuaries, and groundwater-dependent ecosystems. And that is available in a publication presented by Angela Artherington, which is available in that link. When we considered the classification of inland water resources, what we did is we utilized this document that was produced by the South African National Biodiversity Institute, and from source to sea or sea to source, it presents a good view of the different types of water resources, the inland water resources, surface and groundwater, and the interactions between the two. Rivers, lakes, often referred to in many parts of Africa as dams, but it's important to realize that the dam is the structure that holds the flows, and that the artificial lake is what forms behind that structure, which is what we refer to as the aquatic ecosystem. Also, right down to the coastal areas where we're looking at coastal lakes and estuaries. So there is a link to the manual which is available to you, which is online. Environmental flows have become an important part of water resource management across the continent. Environmental flows regionally influence. There were regional influences primarily from South Africa with the establishment or development of environmental flows in the region. This comes from the early 1990s. But there have been important contributions from Australia, Europe, and North America in particular. And that also relates to the plethora of environmental flow assessment methods that are available for us today. All of these environmental flow methods and the application, the development of frameworks associated with these methods, the methods themselves, the implementation of the methods, the management of water resources in the context of environmental flow, all forms part of natural water resource management in the region. And I have provided a link to the National Water Resource Strategy of South Africa, which is again just another example of how these management strategies have been established. In the context of the environmental flows and the water resource management on different spatial scales, it is important to consider environmental flows in the context of water allocation, resource protection, and importantly socio-ecological and economic sustainability. And that is where the context must be made between how water resources are being allocated or utilized on a small spatial scale within a small defined spatial area, and also the upstream downstream connections with that area. Many of the water resources are connected on a landscape scale, and when we're considering environmental flows and environmental flow management, it's often very important for us to make sure that we consider connections downstream of the study area that we're looking at, and also implications upstream for environmental flow management that can then address water resource management on meaningful spatial scales, which is often on a catchment or a basin scale. Many African states have adopted aspects of the National Water Resource Strategy of South Africa, which was established in 1998, and it's worth having a look at, which is available online, or you can go through the National Water Resource Strategy, which is available in that link. Also consider resource-directed measured procedures of South Africa, which has been very instrumental in driving a lot of the ecological reserve, water resource classification, the establishment of resource quality objectives or targets from South Africa, which has moved up into the rest of, influence a lot of the policies in the rest of Africa. So it would be useful just to have a look. The Nile Basin Initiative was established in February of 1999. The Nile Basin Initiative is an intergovernmental partnership of 10 Nile African Basin countries, including Burundi, DRC Congo, Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, the Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. Eritrea does participate as an observer at the moment. These are the objectives of the NBI. The first is to develop the Nile Basin water resources, or develop those resources in a sustainable and equitable way to ensure prosperity, security, and peace for all of its people. So it is a collaborative program by all of these states to ensure the efficient water management and the optimal use of the resources, and give that support to achieve that, to ensure cooperation and joint action between the riparian countries seeking these win-win gains. The fourth target is to target poverty eradication and promote economic integration, and finally to ensure that the program results in a move from planning to action for water resources in the basin. Let's move on. There is a leadership structure of the Nile Basin Initiatives, and I'm just going to run through that quickly, where we know that there are different components of the NileCom, NileTAC, different subsidiary action programs. There's ENTRO, the Eastern Nile Technical Regional Office. There's the NileSAP CU, which is coordination units, and each have their own subsidiary action programs. Okay, and there is a link here for you to gain access to the website, which is what I've used to get this information. Okay, in terms of the Nile Basin website and different parts of the website, this is just some indication of the different parts that you can use to look at, download some of the information, to go to the website and download some of the outputs of these different programs that I've been speaking about, to look at the Nile Basin Sustainability Framework, for example. All these different components are available on the website. The NBI developed a strategy for the management of environmental flows in 2016. The strategy was prepared by the NileTech Technical Advisory Committee and the Nile Basin Environmental Flows Expert Group, which was established as a part of that committee through a course of the preparation of the NBI guidance documents on environmental flows. This was based on, first of all, a review of international practice in environmental flow management, which is one of three outputs of this process, including a background document, environmental flows, which was a review of good practices and experience, and that is all available through the website, so I would encourage you to have a look. The second is the desktop level assessment of the Nile Basin aquatic ecosystem types and their states, looking at their conditions. That is also available through the website as document 2 as a part of the output of that program. The third is to review experiences in an environmental flow context in the Nile Basin. That is the background document number 3. And apart from the background documents, the actual Nile Basin Environmental Flows Framework Technical Implementation Manual was developed as a part of that process. This all culminated with the formation of the strategy, and the strategy captures the proposed way ahead in the mainstreaming environmental flow management in the basin. And this led to this course environmental flow assessment for selected sites in the Nile Basin, which is part of the study that is being undertaken at the moment, and this output is a part of that process. When we consider the other modules, this just shows how the other modules lead from this introductory module. What are they? So we're going to look at, and these are just the important aspects of those modules. This is the introduction. We're also going to look at the framework and its application for the framework, and what an environmental flow framework is as opposed to another environmental flow assessment method. What are the different environmental flow assessment methods that are available to us? Some of the advantages and disadvantages of these different methods. We're going to look at some examples of environmental flow assessments in Africa, and specifically again I'm going to introduce PropFlow to you. We're going to look at the framework, the Nile eFlows framework, and how to implement the framework, and finally environmental flows in the context of other regional scale water resource management, and importantly looking at sustainable development goals. Yeah. The course environmental flow assessment for selected sites, when in this particular study we were interested, this is a program that is being funded by GIZ, and it is being undertaken by Hydrock, as I mentioned at the beginning of this module, in collaboration with the University of Mpumalanga. I have then provided some recommendations for further reading. It would be very important for you to go to the NBI website and look at technical documents that are available from that website, and they include the Nile Basin Water Resources Atlas, the Nile Basin Transboundary Wetlands Information, the State of the Basin Environmental and Social Management Framework for the basin, and then just understanding Nile Basin hydrology and relevant implications. We've also provided, we recommend that you look at the background documents that were developed as a part of the environmental flow framework that was established in 2016, and that includes background document 1, environmental flow assessment, a review of global practices, background document 2, aquatic ecosystems of the NBI, their well-being and response to flow alterations. And remember, at this time there wasn't a lot of information that has subsequently been determined, so not only is it important to look at this document, but look at all of the subsequent outcomes that do evaluate the state of environmental ecosystems in the basin and the condition of those ecosystems in the basin. And then the guidance document on environmental flows that was developed in 2016, background document number 3, which is concerned with the management of environmental flows in the basin, that's best practices and experiences. We advise you to look at the NBI, the Nile Basin Environmental Flow Framework Technical Implementation Manual, and some of the case studies that were considered as a part of the development of that manual, relevant international water resource management references with eFlows as an emphasis. That's also something we recommend. And they, two of the very useful ones that I recommend that you look at this stage, it's a broader environmental flows in the context of water resource management and its development. I recommend that you look at the 2011 review that was undertaken by King and Pinar of sustainable use of South Africa's inland water resources. That is a review of 12 years of the attempt to implement the National Water Act, which is very useful, and that's available online. I'd also recommend that you look at the Water for the Environment, From Policy to Science and Implementation and Management, which is a publication produced by Academic Press in 2017. That is a publication that's authored by Avril Horn. I really recommend that you look at that one as well. That's it for the first module, the introductory module to environmental flows in and the series of 5 modules in the Nile Basin. I would encourage you, please, for more information, to contact Hydrock directly at info@hydrock.de. As I recommended, please look at the Nile Basin website, and if you'd like any more information from the University of Mpumalanga, please visit our website as well. Thank you very much.